This trial begins Monday with jury selection. It's a death penalty case, and there are several defendants associated with this case, but it's Andre Warner, the alleged gunman, who will be on trial first. Again, death penalty case beginning Monday. A lot to unravel here. Let's bring in our think tank tonight. Joining us, criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy and criminal defense attorney Mark Crumbine and municipal court judge Tiffany Porter. Welcome to you all. Great to have you aboard tonight. It all started with a dating app. Tiffany, I haven't heard of this particular fact scenario where the date is allegedly used as a way to kind of scout out the victim. This is scary stuff.
Well, it's very common. This is, what people what people were dealing with this with Craigslist before. Now they're doing it on the dating apps, and they're going after people and having one person be the person that's going to pretty much see what's the lay of the land and what the person has to offer, and then you bring the other people back. You get that person where they're comfortable with you and they trust you, and then you bring in the other people to rob them.
Eklund, this to me, it's a single dad, probably doesn't have a lot of time to go dating, so he's going to, rely upon what's out there, which are these apps which make it a little bit easier to meet people.
Yeah, social media is the thing now. There's a whole show about it called Catfish. This happens so often, and it's unfortunate that somebody lost their lives. But we see, as attorneys, especially in Atlanta, we see it start with social media and dating apps, in which it starts off as a romantic tryst, and all to just case your house, all to just see how many electronics you have, to see what type of car you drive, where you work, what type of shiny things you have in your home. It's unfortunate, but it happens often.
All right, let's take a listen to Andy Ray, who's with the police department, on how they got a break in this case.
The men and women who are assigned to the criminal investigations unit here worked really hard to solve this case. We got very little sleep and made a lot of contacts, talked to a lot of people, and we got a break in the case. We were excited about the break. We weren't sure what it was going to turn into. Winter Haven Police Department officers, a couple of detectives rather, were investigating a burglary that they had recently in town. And they were going to check on a house in the Juanita area of Winter Haven to try to find the perpetrator. And that person was Haley Bustos. And as they got there, she was there in a car, and she fled from them and got away at that time. And then they called us to talk to us because someone at the house said something about the murder in Auburndale and thought that was the victim's car. It was not. But that kind of led us to her and to being able to identify her and locate her and a couple of people that were acquaintances of hers. As the investigation continued, this was yesterday afternoon late, probably 4:30, something like that in the afternoon. And that's when we were able to find Haley Bustos within a couple of hours. And she was arrested on a probation violation on board of the court over on the west side of town. And she was arrested at an apartment that she's been staying at for the last week or 2 weeks, according to those folks that were there.
All right, Mark Crumbine, I'm looking at this, and I want to start here before we get into how this trial is going to go. But I heard she had a probation violation. So maybe when you're on the dating app, before you accept the date with that person, you also go on the internet and do a background check on the person from the dating app.
Sounds like that would have been a great idea. The other thing that's sort of amazing is that he would take her back to his apartment home and didn't even know her. She was a complete stranger, and that was sort of risky too. Doesn't excuse the horrible event that happened, but that certainly was a risk for him.
I know, you look at, and again, it shouldn't be, but it is, right, Eklund? If in fact this is the way prosecutors say it, is that it was this master plan all along, there's got to be ways that you got to protect yourself, because you can't necessarily rely upon the dating apps to protect you. You've got to protect yourself.
You really do, but you also, I mean, you just don't know you don't know who you're dealing with. That person on the dating app, they are telling you their best selves. They are lying to you. You're trying to get a date. And I think that he dropped his guard and allowed this woman to come to his house, and this is what happens. These are the types of things that happen. Not everybody's a good person. You know, there are people that are well-intentioned on the apps, and there are people that aren't. She basically went there with a motive to rob him, and she got what she wanted. It's unfortunate that somebody had to lose their lives.
You know, Mark, she seems to be the key to this entire case, because I'm reading this police investigation, and it seems all the information came from her after she was arrested.
Of course. Yeah.
But do you think there is some perhaps negotiating taking place behind the scenes to try to get her as a witness in the death penalty case against the alleged gunman, Andre Warner?
I'd bet that there was. You know, she's lucky that she was the first person arrested, because that gives her the greatest value as in, you know, helping the police. The first person arrested a lot of times with multiple defendants in a murder is really the lucky one, even though they don't feel very lucky when they get arrested. And it's going to be a race for the other defendants to see who can work out, you know, an agreement to cooperate because of the terribly serious nature of this case.
Judge, what do you think about Haley Bustos and her role in all this and how she should be treated?
I don't think she should get any advantage just because she's the first one. She was most likely put everything together. And it wasn't the first time that it wasn't the first time she had been at his house. You know, they hung out before, and then he got comfortable with her, and she should be just as accountable as the person who shot him in the head. I mean, she was a part of it and probably the mastermind of all this, and now she gets a break. I don't think so. I don't think it's fair just because she's coming forth and giving all the information. I don't think she should get a break.
Eklund, what do you think?
I'm gonna have to concur. It's not fair. She put the plan in motion, but for her involvement, he would still be alive. So she should absolutely garner the same type of punishment as though she pulled the trigger, because essentially she did, by bringing these men to his home.
Mark, the other heartbreaking part of all this is a man who is, you know, it's a robbery, yet they've got to shoot him in the head and kill him. He's begging for his life. He's a good guy. He just loves Florida State, loves his daughter.
Well, you know, I read that she was paid $50 for this, so she might not have been the mastermind for $50. Not too good at thinking if that's a real scenario. And she may claim also she didn't know anybody would be hurt, and maybe she didn't know that. We don't know, but it's a terrible scenario, and it's, you know, sometimes people will kill the victim simply to get rid of a witness. It's that some people are that cold-hearted, and perhaps that's what happened here.
Well, that's the chance you take.
Yeah.
When we come back, this trial begins on Monday. Wednesday, Robert Durst back on trial in Los Angeles. Cameras in the courtroom, opening statements. We'll talk about that next. Robert Durst, the eccentric heir of a late prominent New York real estate developer, has aged drastically in front of the cameras from one court appearance to the next. Opening statements in Los Angeles are scheduled to begin next week. The case is built around a story so sensational it inspired a 2010 feature film starring Ryan Gosling titled All Good Things.
You make me out to be this person that you think that I am. I'm not this person.
Whose tagline reads, "The perfect love story until it became the perfect crime."
If anything happens to me, don't let them get away with it.
Durst is also the subject of a 6-part documentary called The Jinx.
Nobody tells the whole truth.
The show is credited in part with helping investigators build their case atop the evidence unearthed by the Jinx series.
But you can't imagine.
According to a 2019 New York Times report, Durst's defense attorneys were considering a plan to introduce raw audio from his recordings in The Jinx.
Kill them all. Of course.
Durst's lawyers assert that the filmmakers selectively pulled out specific lines to make him look guilty and edited them in a different order than how he said them. Durst, now 76, estimated to be worth $100 million, is accused of fatally shooting his best friend Susan Berman in 2000 to keep her silent about the disappearance and presumed killing of his wife Kathleen, who vanished from New York in 1982. Prosecutors say Berman is one of two people Durst killed to cover up the slaying of his first wife. The other murder Durst was charged with is the death of and dismemberment of his elderly neighbor, Morris Black, because Black had discovered Durst's true identity.
You can't take the iceberg away from the Titanic, and you can't take away what he did to Morris Black.
At the time, to elude arrest, Durst had disguised himself as a mute woman living in a $300 a month rooming house.
Bob Durst, a multimillionaire from a billionaire family in New York, was living in Galveston in a $300 a month rundown apartment that he rented dressed as a woman under an assumed name.
Durst was tried and acquitted in the murder of Morris Black. His attorneys claim Durst shot Black in self-defense.
Will the defendant please rise? For the verdict of the jury is such. Will the jury find the defendant, Robert Durst, not guilty?
The judge told would-be jurors facing the prospect of serving 5 months in the murder trial of Robert Durst that this is a fascinating case. You're never going to have an experience like this. Unbelievable. Robert Durst, right? Let's track this a little bit. 1982, his wife goes missing. 2000, his friend and confidant is murdered. Then 2003, his neighbor is shot and killed and dismembered. Okay? So now, back in 2003, that case in Texas went to trial. He was found not guilty. Not guilty. Why? Because prosecutors did not present the jury with evidence of the victim's head. Why couldn't they find the head? Because Robert Durst admits that he dismembered and cut body parts and got rid of them. Yet he was found not guilty. So here's the question I have for our think tank tonight. Can a defendant be found not guilty of murdering two different people in two different states with two different victims? Is that possible? Mark, what do you think?
Well, it is possible, but it's probably unlikely. They're going to allow evidence from the past murders to come in, I understand, for this trial. So that could really taint the jury. And so each time there's a murder and they bring up a past not guilty, it's less likely he'll get a not guilty in the future.
You say taint the jury. I say let the jury know all the facts. Judge, what do you think? Two victims, two different states, two different murder trials. Can he get two not guilties?
I think he can. I think it helps him that he's been acquitted. Who gets acquitted of the things that he was charged with? And I mean, that's what I would use on the defense side to show that my client wasn't guilty here. He's not guilty in this instance as well. He continues to be accused of things that he just did not do and that he should not be charged with in the first place. I think it's a good thing that those cases were in his favor.
Eklund Mercy, how much would you like to try a case as a criminal defense attorney in Galveston, Texas, where this jury said, despite the fact that he dismembered his neighbor and got rid of the body parts, and then after he was arrested, fled the jurisdiction, they still came back and said, oh no, he's not guilty.
That's amazing. That's why jury selection is so important. Jury selection is the most important part of a trial, and it's rulings like this why it's so important. They found him not guilty, so there is a possibility that he may be found not guilty again. It's all about jury selection. Who do you have on there? Can they believe that he can be found not guilty again? And that's what it is.
Mark Crumbine, he's now a 76-year-old, seemingly much more feeble old man. Does that impact the jury at all?
Yes, that's the newest trend. We see Harvey Weinstein coming in crutches and sitting in a wheelchair. This gentleman is also in a wheelchair, and it's amazing that some of these cases take so long to come to court. I mean, not the attorney's fault. It's just they're difficult cases for detectives to put together, and we seem like we're going through a whole group of them now.
How much of an advantage, Judge, is it that this is a criminal defendant with $100 million?
We know that money talks in the criminal justice system, unfortunately, and it's about the money and the power. And I mean, he looks terrible now, but he's been able to live his life after killing, allegedly killing all of these people. But, I think that money talks, and being able to hire some of the best defense attorneys in the country and having some of the best experts come on, that's, in his favor.
Eklund Mercy, if you've got a client walks in the door worth $100 million, and it's a murder case, do you think you can kind of put the other cases to the side for just a few moments and focus on this and give him like the greatest defense ever?
The best, the absolute best concierge service. For real, like he is getting platinum service. $100 million, come on in here. But again, it's all about jury selections. This is when you spend on jury consultants, you spend on trying to figure out what the best jury is for this particular client. And it also helps that he looks 1,000 years old, because it's going to be hard for the jury to separate when the actual crime took place and what he looks like right now.
All right, he has become somewhat of a notorious celebrity, Mark, because of this Jinx show on HBO. He did serve some time for dismembering the body, not for the murder. He got out, and he was the subject of that HBO docuseries, which was a huge hit. I mean, millions and millions of people watched this thing, were captivated by it. Does that have any impact on this case, do you think?
Well, I think it could. There'll be a number of people that are familiar with this case because of the documentary series, but it's amazing to me. There are always a lot of people that don't know anything about the history of this. They won't. They haven't watched the series. They haven't talked about it. We even saw a comedy thing about the O.J. Simpson case, where jury selection thing. I'm sure millions of people watched it on the internet, and some people just don't know. And they'll be able to get unbiased jurors, I think.
Okay, when we come back, it's time to put our system of justice on trial and how they treat different people. And specifically, there's two stories that we covered this week on this network, on this show, that have me like, what is going on? We'll talk about that next.
You would think that on a case of this magnitude that everything would be done right, and a lot of things were done wrong.
On the next episode of OJ 25.
With regard to your investigation, were you concerned about trace evidence when you carried those tennis shoes under your arm?
Mr. Cochran, I make mistakes.
All right.
There were certainly things that could have been done better.
An all-new original true crime series, OJ 25. New episode Thursday night at 9/8 Central. Only on Court TV.
Her temper tantrum, while the guy who's been convicted of murder is chatting and enjoying his bottle of Fiji water. What is going on in our system of justice? I don't understand this. This has me really confused. I don't know which one is more outrageous. Fiji water for the murderer, zip tie for the 6-year-old girl at school. Let's bring back in our think tank, get a little perspective here. Eklund, I'll start with you because you're right next to me. I don't understand this. Which should outrage me more?
The little girl, because that is racism. Because understand this, if she was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, we would not have this conversation, because this would not have happened. The issue is that our little girls are not seen as little girls. They are seen as little public enemy number ones. There was no reason, there was no reason at all for her to have been apprehended the way she was. And then had it been a private citizen to throw a child in the back with her hands tied without no car seat or anything like that, they would be charged with a misdemeanor. This was repugnant. It bothered me. It really bothers me.
You know, Mark, we've got on the one hand a convicted murderer. He's just been convicted of murder, and he's hanging out in the courtroom with his bottle of Fiji water. And then the 6-year-old at school is being zip-tied with the hands behind her back.
Yeah, I mean, I've handled a lot of murder cases in my career, and usually if a person's found guilty, they're typically handcuffed immediately behind their back. And, in federal court, Of course, they're got handcuffs, leg irons, and a shock belt on all the time, and there's a U.S. Marshal standing nearby with a shotgun. So apparently it wasn't that way in the murder conviction, and there's no excuse for how they treated that little girl. It's especially repugnant that they zip tied her behind her back. You know, that's what you would normally do for an adult, but it's even
not for a convicted murderer, Mark.
Yeah.
You got to give them their Fiji water first.
Yeah.
Why would you handcuff them before they got a nice drink of the designer water?
You want to extend every courtesy to them, but it's so ridiculous, and that's a great comparison. That's shocking what they did to that poor child, and I hope, I'm sure there'll be a huge civil suit too, and that.
Oh, that's pending. We spoke with the lawyer last night. That is out there for sure. That's happening. And for people who are going to get angry about a civil suit, guess what? You get an offender bender, you get thousands of dollars for your soft tissue injuries that you got back here, right? You know that happens. Like my 6-year-old gets zip tied, is now scared of police, is waking up with nightmares, is afraid to go to school. Are you kidding me? Now has to switch schools, and now I've got to send her to private school. Come on, Judge. Your thoughts about? Let's start. Can we start with Judge? I'll start with the convicted murderer. Convicted murderer shoots and kills his estranged wife, chases her down in the parking lot, shoots her in the back of the head.
Well, it goes back to our justice system, and look at who we're talking about. There was a white male and a little black girl. I mean, unfortunately, this is what we have to talk about. These are the issues that are still plaguing our country to this day. And I don't believe if the convicted murderer was black that would be the same video that we would see. I mean, it's unfortunate, and it's just deplorable as to how they treated her. This is going to be something that is going to potentially wreck her for the rest of her life. And for him to just be able to just shoot the, talk and shoot the breeze, and have his water and, his time and not taken immediately into custody, that is a problem. And that judge should have been on top of that he should have been taken into custody immediately. There is no excuse for that at all.
All right, Eklund, I've been frustrated a little bit this week, and both were very shocking to me. Convicted murderers, and maybe they do it different in different places. This is in Missouri. I haven't covered a lot of cases in Missouri, but everyone that I've spoken to has never seen a scene like that, and where a murderer, I mean, even people convicted of something less in a courtroom are usually taken into custody at that moment. Eventually, he was handcuffed in the front so he could hold on to his water.
I can't. My spirit is weary. First of all, and then you have him flailing his arms around. Now, I've had my clients who just scratch their nose and almost get chokehold to death because it seemed threatening. But he's just given free range to do all this movement while you have a little girl who barely can take a shower by herself being hogtied and thrown into the back of the car. I can't. This is wrong. It's clearly based, you can see the privilege written all over it, and it's a problem. It's a problem that we have to deal with consistently.
Mark Crumbine, the other thing that bothered me about the 6-year-old, little Kaya, was that her grandma, who takes care of her, was not notified until she was on the way to juvie. No, not a phone call from the school, a little courtesy call. I mean, at the moment that she was taken into custody, she was coloring.
Yeah, I guess we think that simple common courtesy and common sense would dictate how to treat a child that's that young in a school. But I guess they're going to have to make a code or change some laws or do something, because apparently there aren't enough people with common sense. You can't, if a child acts out in school, they could be put on a timeout or quiet time. If it gets really bad, maybe call the parents and have them come down, something like that. No young child deserves to be arrested or whatever they want to call that, and handcuffed. I guess she would be considered arrested, but she wasn't charged with anything, but she was definitely taken into custody, which is unbelievable. And remember, for instance, in Ohio, you're 10 years old or younger, you're incompetent. There is no mens rea there is no possible crime you could be charged with, in most states, I would imagine.
Yeah, 6 years, it's 6. We're not, a lot of times when we do these stories about kids, we're talking about, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, maybe an 11-year-old, maybe 6 years old. Now, the police chief from down in Orlando, that officer has been fired. But he also said that they've instituted changes in their department. I want to let you know what they are. The juvenile arresting procedure policy now includes any arrest of a juvenile under the age of 12 must receive a deputy chief's approval. Prior, it was a manager's approval, okay? Any charter school requesting an officer to work extra duty at their school will now be managed by the school resource officer supervisor, not through the traditional extra duty program. And within the first few days of learning this, I requested from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for an administrative expunction of the charges against the child arrested, okay? So the chief stepped in after the fact, right, and took care of all that, thank goodness. But what do you think about the changes? Is that going to be enough, you think?
No. Was that really a change? Because that is still stating that you can arrest a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. It didn't say that they wouldn't be placed under arrest anymore. It said that they were going to take different steps to still arrest them. That is the problem. Why are you arresting a 6-year-old? So that is where the problem is, not to change the scope of it and still allow children under the age of 10 to be taken into custody. There should be some other steps. Maybe you still bring the police officer into the school, but have a sit down with the parent, the police officer, and the school officials, and then talk it out. And then maybe have the school punish the student. But to arrest them, and on what grounds? So
well, that's the other thing.
That's not enough.
We're talking about crimes here, right? And I can understand sometimes children might get a gun in their hands or a weapon. This was a temper tantrum, and apparently one of the staff members got kicked during the temper tantrum, and that's it. Even if she was an adult, it would have been a misdemeanor. Yes. So we're talking about a misdemeanor during a temper tantrum at school where a staff member got kicked and I guess got a boo-boo, and she's 6 years old. Eklund, go ahead.
Every single adult that I see in the video should have been fired from their job. The fact that it was able to go to that length is a problem for me. That teacher that called the cops, fired. The supervisor who allowed it to happen, fired. The person who has the body cam, fired. The person who fingerprinted her, fired. The person who took the mugshot, fired. They should all be fired because at no point, none of them had the right sense to understand that she is 6 years old and that she was having a temper tantrum. The message that you are sending is that black girls cannot get upset. Black girls cannot be children. Black girls cannot do what they're supposed to do at 6 years old. So I am absolutely appalled, and I feel like everybody should get some and everybody should have gotten fired.
Yeah. Oh, you forgot one fact also. Grandma was told, yeah, and if she doesn't show up, we're going to send a bench warrant for her arrest.
The judge, too. It's all of it. None of this makes sense. The fact that any of this happened and then they gave, the
Could you imagine, what would you do, Mark, what would you do if someone walked into your office and said, can you help me get my child's record expunged? And then they said, my child is 6 years old.
I would contact a civil attorney because right away, because I think that's outrageous, and it just it's so sad that people would conduct themselves that way, and too bad it has and I agree with the judge and the other panel member that since when do you have to arrest ever a 6-year-old? They created a policy to stop it, but or to modify the way it's done. But the better idea, like they said, was why would you even need to do that? That you could never convict a child in court even if you wanted to. So why are you even fooling around with it to begin with?
I mean, and that's the bottom line to this whole thing. It's so true, Mark, that at the end of the day, even if, as a prosecutor, you handed me this file, I would be like, there is nothing I can do with this. This child is 6 years old. Unreal. All right. A lot of outrage for that one. There's a lot of outrage for another one. Also involves children, but not 6-year-olds. Children who are graduating high school and going on to that next step in life, college, and the things that parents do to get those kids into the school of their choice. It's the college admissions scandal. And let me tell you, Lori Loughlin, Aunt Becky, she's fighting it. And I think Aunt Becky may very well win this battle. We'll talk about that and get your reaction on social media next. All right, take a look. There's Lori Loughlin, a.k.a. Aunt Becky, walking out of court. She's one of the few defendants in the college admissions scandal that is actually fighting the federal government, taking them to task and saying, we are going to trial. You know, all these stories you've heard about Felicity Huffman and the Hot Pockets people all getting sentenced to jail or prison time, they all have pleaded guilty. They've thrown in the towel and are not fighting the charges. But Lori Loughlin and her husband, who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, are fighting the case. And a huge development this week that may indicate that they may very well have a chance of beating the government because they allege a Brady violation. They are alleging that the government did not hand over exculpatory information. They sat on it for 18 months. And now they're going to file a motion in front of the judge relative to that. And it will also, if it goes to trial, end up being evidence that the defense will use. Take a look at what they're talking about here. There were some notes on the iPhone of the ringleader of the entire admissions scandal. And let me read for you what those notes say and what it says in the papers here. The most problematic aspect of this disclosure consists of notes that Singer, he's the ringleader, created on his iPhone in early October 2018, memorializing his interactions with FBI agents on October 2nd, 2018. So these are the notes from the ringleader. Loud and abrasive call with agents, meaning the FBI. They continue to ask me to tell a fib and not restate what I told my clients as to where their money was going, to the program, not the coach, and that it was a donation and they want it to be a payment. You following the bouncing ball here, folks? What the defense and Lori Loughlin is saying is what their defense is. They believe that this was a donation going to the program to help get their kid in, like people who donate wings to schools, not a payment. And the FBI, according to this note, is telling the ringleader, who's wearing a wire, to lie and get these people on recordings to admit that it was a payment, even though all along he was telling them it was a donation to the program. This one, I don't know how this is going to turn out, folks. We posted on social media. We got some reaction tonight. Our comment of the day comes from Stephen. Whether the feds committed the Brady violation doesn't excuse the fact that she committed fraud. She needs to be accountable for what she did. This entitled woman now wants to use her money toward a loophole in getting out of this mess. She needs to learn that money isn't the remedy for everything. Judge Porter, is a Brady violation a loophole?
I mean, that's what the criminal justice system is for. And that's where you have these breaks. And money is everything in these cases. And if she has something that she can hang her hat on, and if I'm defending her and I have a loophole or anything that can exonerate my client, I'm going to use it to the fullest. You are supposed to represent your client zealously, and you use all of the tools that you have.
Beth writing, I understand wanting better for your kid. However, what they did was wrong. I agree 7,000% it was wrong. Take your lumps and serve your time? Mark Crumbine, should Aunt Becky be locked up for this?
Well, I don't like even Brady violation being called a loophole. The police and the prosecutors owe all the evidence to the defendant. And if they wait 18 months, that's terrible. This was a pretty strong case to begin with against this actress. They should have just put all the cards on the table, and now they've created a problem, not a loophole. They've created a problem themselves.
All right, Pam is writing tonight. I happen to agree with you on this one, Vinny. While it obviously is possible because of privilege gained through wealth, I don't see how this is criminal at all. Same thing happens in many, many stages in life. Life is not fair, but you have to deal with it. Let me ask you this, Eklund. And I know we probably don't agree on this one, but let me ask you. What's the difference between what Aunt Becky is doing and what the people who donate to universities and they build wings, and surprisingly, it happened to me in my school, the child ends up going to the school?
Well, if the child qualifies to go into the school, then it's a win-win situation. However, I think...
Wait, but who determines if they qualified, and how do we determine who qualifies and who doesn't qualify?
Well, here's the thing with regards to Aunt Becky, which I'm all for her going to trial and just trying her hand. I am all for it. I am here to watch it. However, it's my understanding that, you know, there were things like people that were the kids were in clubs or stated that they were in clubs that they were actually in clubs that they had grades that they didn't actually earn. So they went in with, with impropriety. They went in with lies. So I think that the donation was to manufacture this kid. Now, if you're saying that all they did was donations and just so happens that their kid that is qualified got into the school, I think Becky may have a chance, and I'm here to watch it. I'm here to watch it.
I don't know if they're qualified, not qualified. One of the girls went on Instagram. She didn't even want to go to college. I think, and the sad part is, I think the parents just wanted this so they could talk at cocktail parties about their daughters going to USC. And I get that, and that's wrong. That's terrible. I'm just wondering how we get into a criminal court and why the FBI is working on this case when they've already caught the ringleader. Anyhow, Melissa writing, this isn't something new. Rich families have been doing it for years. A wing here, a new library there. She's a small fish in a big pond. Judge, it's wrong on many levels, but do you think the universities have any obligation to police themselves and their employees here? Because according to the indictments, which I've read, the so-called victims of all these cases are the universities.
Really? They are not the victims. They're accepting monies and continuing to accept monies, and then the process of getting the children in or getting the students in is subjective, and we leave that open. That's the universities doing that. That's their fault. So they're not victims in this. They're coming off like fat rats. Are they giving that money back? The monies that they received?
No, and they're not giving back the tuition either.
Exactly.
All right, great job by my think tank tonight. Eklund, Judge Porter, great to see you. Mark, great to have you here while you're in town. Awesome job. All right, folks, big week coming up next week here on Court TV. We've got 2 different new trials, one on Monday, death penalty case, and then on Wednesday, the Durst trial as well. Gavel-to-gavel coverage, that's what we do on Court TV, so you can see and hear all the evidence for yourself. That's it for now. We'll see you next time, and as always, folks, don't forget to hug the kids.
Next week on Court TV.
You might remember him from the HBO docuseries The Jinx, but next week, eccentric billionaire Robert Durst will stand trial for the murder of his friend Susan Berman. Once a jury is selected, Court TV will take you inside the courtroom for opening statements. And did an online date with a stranger lead to murder? Our teams will be live in Florida for the dating app murder trial.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan next week, starting at 6/5 Central on the all-new Court TV.